Over the years, I've come across a lot of mixing advice. Some of it is essential, some of it is outdated, and some of it just doesn't make any sense at all. So in this video, I'm ranking common mixing advice from D tier to S tier based on how useful it is in real sessions. And just like before, this is my personal list based on what I actually use and what constantly works for me. Let's get into it. Alright, let's start with the first one. Don't master your own tracks. I don't agree with this. I think when you are mixing or producing the track, you can also master the track if you know what you're doing. But most of the time, I think like 80% of the time when I'm mixing or producing a track, I do the mastering as well. Not because I don't trust other engineers, but because I really like the process of mastering. If the artist decides to give the track to another mastering engineer, I'm totally fine with that. And it also can really benefit sometimes because you have another opinion or another set of ears that can shine some light on your project. So yeah, as long as you know what you're doing, I think you can master your own tracks and there's no problem with that. But if you don't really know about mastering and don't really know what you are actually doing, then it's a really good choice to don't master your own track. So I'm not going to place this at D tier, but I'm going to place this at C tier. Mix and master in the same project. I do this all the time because sometimes when I'm mastering, I would like to adjust some things in the mix, like maybe we need a little less bass or maybe I need a little bit more sidechain. Then I just like to do that in the mix project and hear the results for the master right away. So I'm not a really big fan of separating this process. I like to keep this all in the same project. Maybe I make a new save or a new bookmark or something like that, but I always keep this process in the same project. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this. It saves time. If you want to adjust something in the mix and you have to jump into another project, you have to reopen it, yada yada. I'm a really big fan of this. So let's place this at A tier. Master at -14 loves. Nowadays, in the days of streaming, you see a lot of times that people recommend mastering at -14 loves. I really think this is some BS because those same tracks are distributed to a lot of different platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, whatever. They all have these different targets, and if you are buying that track from iTunes or something, then the track is at -14 LUFS. That's not loud enough. That's not compatible with any other tracks you are buying from a platform. So yeah, I don't recommend mastering at -14 LUFS. I always aim for -9, -8 or -7, depending a little bit on the genre. So yeah, I totally disagree with this, so this is going in D tier. Fix it in the mix. A lot of times when I worked with artists, they were just too lazy, or they were already done with producing the track, or they were done with recording vocals, and they just asked me to fix it in the mix. I think this is super lame and super lazy. If you are working on tracks and if this is your passion, you have to put some work in it. If you cannot get the tone right, or if you cannot get your energy right at that moment, or the samples you're choosing are not right, and you're done with it for a moment, just take a break, go back to it the next day. The world is not ending if you miss a deadline and you have to reschedule. Just reschedule or something. The better material I receive from the artist, or the better material I receive from the producer, the better the mix is going to be. A good mix starts at a good production or a good performance. Fix it in the mix is a band-aid solution. Fix it in the production state. So this is going in D tier. Use templates. I'm a big fan of templates. It saves me tons of time. I have my drum bus processing ready. I have my bass bus processing ready. Some processing on the music bus already. So I just load up my tracks, send them to these buses, and the things I do in every mix are already pre-done for me. There are some plugins in it, plugin chain with metering that also tell me if my gain staging is solid. So yeah, I'm a big fan of templates. I use it all the time and I really like making templates. So use templates goes in S tier. don't use more than 5 plugins on a channel. I've seen a couple of times when I uploaded the video, and I also see other people saying this, that you cannot use more than 5 plugins on a channel because you are over processing, or you are destroying your mix, or the most of the basics can be done with 5 plugins. I do think there's a point here, but I also think this is something you cannot do. I like to use more plugins than 5 plugins on a channel, especially on vocals. I use an EQ, de-esser, compressor, saturation, something like soothe, sometimes another de-esser, another compressor, maybe some multiband compression as well. So I'm already at 8. And then if I need to adjust some things with EQ, I just put another EQ on it somewhere at the end of the chain, but I'm not going to tweak the EQ that was the first EQ in my plugin chain, because some plugins like compression or something, they add frequencies to your signal that you don't want to have. So that's why I like to put another EQ at the end of the plugin chain. And as far as I counted, I was already at 8 or 9 plugins. So I don't agree with this, but that's also because I know why I'm adding a plugin to that chain. If you're just throwing on plugins without knowing what you are doing, okay, yeah, I don't know, let's throw another compressor on it, let's throw a limiter on it. That's not really how you should be mixing. If you think, hey, maybe I need a little bit more compression, or the vocal is not cutting through, maybe you should look at your chain. Maybe there are some things that need some adjustment, and then you receive the same result as just throwing on compressors and limiters. Look at the compression, do some A/Bing, and listen to what that compressor is doing. And if you think, hey, I need to adjust some things, adjust the plugins that are already in the chain before adding other plugins, just to fix problems that can be fixed way easier by looking at your chain. So this goes into C tier because I don't agree with this, but as long as you know what you're doing. So C tier. Headphones are fine for mixing. I think headphones are fine for mixing. I really like to mix on headphones, but I cannot do a full mix on headphones. I have these these headphones. Sound really nice, but I cannot do a full mix on it because for me personally, it lacks a little bit of low end. So just to check my mixes for the low end, I really need another headphone, or I need my speakers and I need to turn it up a little bit just to hear the impact of the low end and to feel the track pumping and to listen to how it sounds in a room. I don't know. I just cannot do a full mix on headphones. I wish I was able to do it so I can just go on vacation and sit on the beach with a cocktail and do a mix at the same time. But yeah, for some reason it just doesn't work for me. I don't think I know people who do the full 100% of a mix on just on headphones, but I do think there are a lot of people who get great mixes on headphones. So this goes into B tier. Now, cut before boost. I don't really agree with this, but I do understand the philosophy of this. But in a lot of studios, when you are recording, the recording goes from the microphone through the preamp, through an EQ, through compression, and then it goes into your DAW. And most of the time, that EQ is just boosting. It's not cutting, it's boosting the highs, it's giving a little bit more of vibe, or I don't know. And the cutting starts at the DAW. So I don't really agree with this. But if I'm mixing, I always cut before boosting. So this is something that depends a little bit on the situation, I think. So yeah, I understand why people would say this, but I don't think this is something that you should obey to. Let me know otherwise what you guys think. I'm really curious, but I'm going to place this at C. All right, volume automation over compression. So that means that you are already doing some gain adjustments before sending that vocal to a compressor. So you're doing it manually a little bit to give the vocal a little bit more of a natural compression instead of putting a compressor on the signal. I don't do this. I'm not lowering some peaks before it hits the compressor. I'm only doing this if some part of a, let's say, a vocal needs a little bit more compression or is too soft, or the vocalist is away from the microphone and I need to give it a little bit more of gain. But I never lowering the volume before it hits the compressor. I see a lot of people do that as well. I don't know. I see why you will do it, but I just like it more with a compressor. I like that sauce that the compressor is giving when the vocal is a little bit too loud and the compressor is giving it its saturation, especially with a 1176 compressor. So I understand the philosophy, but I don't do it. So D tier. All right. Don't use Highpass. It depends a little bit on the material, of course, but I like to use high passes. Some people say when you use a high pass, you get phase issues. The sounds are too thin. Use a low shelf and dim it down. But did you ever look at a real big console like an SSL console or whatever? What did you see there? A high pass filter. So in the early days, they already thought about this, and there's a lot of great sounding mixes out there with a lot of material that's been high pass, like vocals, guitars, whatever. And if you think a high pass is making the signal sound too thin, then you can just adjust it a little bit till it sounds a bit more warmer or a little bit more fuller. I don't really get this. I use high passes all the time on all material that don't need any bass or low end information. I'm just throwing a high pass filter on it and my mixes sound way cleaner. My low end is way cleaner and I have a lot of more power in my kick drums. So yeah, don't use high passes. I don't agree with this. I use it all the time. Go put it in D tier. Right, EQing in solo. I've read a lot of times that you should not EQ in solo. This is a yes and no for me. If you are mixing and you need to EQ a signal, you should first do it in the whole picture, so not in solo. But if there are some resonances that you cannot find because of all the other elements in your mix, then just EQ it in solo. Find that spot that you want to remove from the signal. As soon as you find that spot, you can dim it down a little bit and then you just unsolo the track and then adjust the dip till you're not hearing it anymore in the big picture. Because mixing is about mixing all the elements together and making it work together. So this goes in B for me. This should be sidechain your bass with your kick. I think there are two ways of sidechaining. You can just sidechain the whole signal to the kick, or you can only sidechain the low end of that signal. I like to use that. I don't really like to use the traditional sidechaining that you are dimming the whole signal down with the kick drum. I always like to keep everything from 150 and above as it is, and everything below 150 hertz that gets dug down with a kick drum, just to make sure that my low end stays clean. So sidechain your bass with your kick depends a little bit on how you do it. There are a lot of other ways to make your bass and your kick work together, especially when you are working with 808s and kicks. I already made a video about this. I put a link somewhere on top of the screen. So yeah, it depends a little bit on how you do it, but I like to sidechain the bass with the kick more with a dynamic EQ than with a normal compressor or with something like Kickstart. So let's put this in B. Mix in 1 hour. You cannot really do a full mix in 1 hour, but let's say you do the first 80% of your mix in 1 hour. That is something I really like to do. I like to follow my instinct when I'm mixing, and I don't want to lose the big picture when I start with the mix. So I'm not rushing into the project, but I do a lot of the big work between 1 and 1.5 hours, just not to lose the bigger picture of the mix and to follow my instinct and not to overthink everything I'm doing. And then I do the other details like adjusting. Maybe I need to adjust the reverb a little bit. Maybe the vocal needs half dB louder, whatever. I spend way more time on that other 20% than on the first 80% that I do in 1 or 1.5 hours. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this method. This is going in S tier. Mix at 80 decibels. I've seen on a lot of forums, a lot of people saying that you should mix at 80 decibels. No way, man. That is way too loud for me. I always am between 70 or 75 decibels or 78 or something. 80 decibels is way too loud for me. If I'm mixing at 80 decibels, for 1 hour, I get a lot of ear fatigue and I can already call it a day. So I always mix a little bit more quiet, and I really like to mix on the NS10s on a lower volume, and I like to mix on the vocals on a lower volume as well. And I think that if the track works on a lower volume, it's definitely working on a louder volume as well. So yeah, I don't agree with mixing on 80 decibels. I really like mixing on a lower volume. So this is going at D tier over here. All right, mix into a limiter. As long as you're not crushing the limiter, I think this is a really good thing to do. I also mix into a limiter. I always mix into the God particle that has a limiter on, and as soon as I start mastering, I disable the limiter. So then I'm going to add some compression or whatever, but just to keep everything safe and already have some type of loudness. For example, that you are pushing the limiter 6 dBs, so you're at a good volume, and then you can just disable the limiter and then you are at -6. That is a good method with a limiter. And with mixing into a limiter, you can already hear a little bit how the track feels when it's mastered. So I really like mixing into a limiter, as long as you're not crushing that limiter, but you can also get a really good mix without mixing into a limiter. So yeah, I'm going to place this at A tier. Mix in mono. I like mixing in mono. I think that I do 70 or 80% of the mix in mono, and that is something I am doing now for, I think, the last 2 or 3 months at this moment, and I find that my mixes translate way better in the real world now that I started doing this. But can you get a good mix when you are not mixing in mono? Definitely. I think there are tons of people who don't mix in mono and get great results. So yeah, mixing in mono benefits me a lot, especially when I'm doing this on the Aventone speakers. But it's not that you cannot get a great mix when you are not mixing in mono. So this is going in A tier for me. All right, reference tracks. Working with reference tracks from any other artist in the same genre really benefits getting a way better mix, at least for me. What I do is I'm not copying the reference tracks. I'm just seeing if my track can hang with it, checking out how my low end is compared to the reference tracks and how the mid frequencies sound compared to the reference tracks, or how loud the vocal is, how loud are the kick and snare on that reference tracks, whatever. I always do that, but I'm not copying it. I always start with just doing my own thing, and just in between I compare it to the reference that the artist sent to me. And I think that I am doing this for 1 or 2 years now, and it really made me a better mixer and not losing the perspective if something is good or not. So using reference tracks, S tier definitely. Start your mix with the kick and bass. Yes, I like to start with my low end. As soon as I get my low end working well, I jump to other elements of the mix. Most of the times kick, bass and snare. Sometimes I do the hi-hats as well. If I finish the hi-hats, I pull down the fader of the hi-hats and I go to the vocals or other elements of the mix and then adjust those. And if I'm happy with those elements, then I bring back the hi-hats in the mix to make sure that the hi-hats and the high end of the vocals are working well together. So yeah, start with your kick and bass, definitely S tier. Now last, gain stage. I already did a video about gain staging, I think 1 or 2 weeks before this video. I'm a really big fan of gain staging. It makes my mixes sound way better if I do this. The plugins work better and I'm sure that nothing is distorting. So yeah, take that extra time and do some proper gain staging. S tier. So yeah, in the S tier I have use templates, do 80% of your mix in 1 hour, use reference tracks, start with your kick and bass to get your low end right, gain stage to make sure you're not distorting and that your plugins behave the way they are supposed to. A tier, mix and master in the same project, because I like to jump back and forth. I like to adjust some things in the mix to make my master sound better, and I don't really like to open another project for that, so that's why I do this in the same project. I like to mix into a limiter because it already sounds a bit more finished. Mix in mono, I'm a really big fan of this at this moment. Ask me again in maybe 1 year and then maybe I changed about that, but at this moment I'm a really big fan of mixing in mono. Headphones are fine for mixing. I like to mix on headphones, but I cannot finish a full mix on just headphones. I wish I was able to. EQing in solo just to find the problems, but if you need to fix those problems, then you should EQ with all the elements on. Sidechain your bass with your kick drum. I'm not a big fan of the traditional sidechain. I like to do this with a dynamic EQ. Like I said in the video, I have a full video about how I sidechain my bass with my kick drum. C tier, don't master your own tracks. I like to master my own tracks, and I do this most of the time, but that's also because I know, or let's say I think I know what I'm doing, and a lot of people are happy with the results. So I do think you can master your own tracks as long as you know what you're doing. Cut before boost. Yeah, I'm in the yes and no on this. Don't use more than 5 plugins on a channel. I often use more than 5 plugins on a channel. Volume automation above compression. I like to use compression above volume automation, and if I need to adjust a little bit of volume in some parts of a vocal a bit louder before it hits the compressor, then I do this, but I'm not doing all types of volume automation before I'm adding compression. Master at -14 LUFS. I don't agree with this. If you want to sell your music as well on iTunes, you don't want to sell a track that is not loud enough and not compatible with other tracks. So yeah, I always aim for -9, -8, -7. It depends a little bit on the situation again. Fix it in the mix. I think this is a super lame excuse if you're just too lazy to finish your tracks. Don't use high-pass filters. Totally disagree with this. My mixes sound way better if I use high pass filters. Mix at 80 dB, way too loud for me. I don't like it. I mix at 75, 78 dB. And if my mix works on a lower volume, it definitely works on a louder volume as well. So that was my mixing advice tier list. Let me know in the comments which tips you swear by and which ones you completely disagree with. I'm totally curious, so please let me know in the comments. And if there is any advice I didn't include, drop it below as well. I might put it in a future video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos about mixing and mastering. I'm Moxie Mappy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.